They used AI to resurrect John Lennon. They brought him back from the dead with ChatGPT. RoboJohn and Dolly Parton are coming right now. Run. Okay, no, there's a new Beatles song. They used AI to make it, and we're going to talk about why that's really, really cool and not nearly as dystopian as that sounds. The music industry has been trying to cheat death for years. Back in 2012, we put Tupac back on stage as a hologram in full PlayStation 3 glory, and plenty of artists have released music long after their deaths. From Michael Jackson to, X is still putting out songs this year, right? And Hollywood's doing it too. They brought back a very uncanny Peter Cushing for Star Wars, and whatever this is in the, Don't watch The Flash, people. It just never feels good, though, you know? Even beyond the cold, soulless eyes, there's something weird about making someone say things they didn't say. Yeah, on about 1,000 different sites, you can load up any artist you want and make them sing anything you want. And I'll admit, they're fun as hell. Who hasn't scrolled past a TikTok of Plankton belting out Rolling in the Deep and stayed just a little too long? I've even played with them myself.
It's like an uncanny valley of my own voice.
But we shouldn't use this to actually commercially bring back singers who aren't with us anymore, right? That feels like a reasonable line to draw. No, people did that. Yeah, in 2021, an organization called Over the Bridge made an album called The Lost Tapes of the 27 Club. The 27 Club is everyone who died at age 27. And they used AI to make new songs by Jimi Hendrix, Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain, Jim Morrison. No, don't do that. I understand this is a mental health organization trying to draw attention to issues of substance abuse in the music community, but don't do that. That is not what you drew attention to in this situation. This piece is about the suffering that Van Gogh went through in his lifetime and how—
You dug up his bones and hung them from a ceiling fan!
Yes, it symbolizes the cycle of—
Duh!
Okay, so what is this new Beatles song and why is it not like that? In 1975, John Lennon had a successful solo career, having left the Beatles 6 years earlier. He and Yoko had just had a son, Sean, and John decided to take a few years off to spend time with them at home. John didn't release any music for 5 years. In 1980, when he finally started to emerge from this hiatus, he was murdered. But as Yoko would tell Paul, Ringo, and George later, he never stopped writing music. In 1995, Yoko sent the remaining Beatles a demo tape of songs John had written during the hiatus. There were 3 songs on it: Free as a Bird, Real Love, and one more that we're going to talk about later. Paul, Ringo, and George got together to record new parts for those first 2 songs, and they were released in 95 and 96 as part of the Beatles Anthology project. This was a re-release and remaster of pretty much everything the Beatles ever did. And they're good. They're good songs. They're Beatles songs, but John's voice sounds weird. They had to really, really heavily filter it to get it to work in the modern recording. These were just recorded on an old tape cassette. These weren't studio tracks they had to work with. And trying to get John's voice out of it without the piano, without the tape noise, it's kind of like trying to get eggs out of a cake you've already baked. So what do you do in that situation? Audio restoration has been around as long as there's been audio. And up until the past few years, the tools we've had are okay. You can use EQ to limit which frequencies you're hearing, which is good for removing the hiss of tapes, but you also lose everything else in that frequency range. There's phase cancellation, which lets you target specific things in the stereo spectrum and isolate them from everything else. This is how a lot of people made instrumental versions of popular songs back in the early days of YouTube. You'd take the left channel and the right channel, you'd invert one of those and place them one over top of the other, and you get the sound of everything that's not in the middle of the mix. So that removes the vocals, but also removes the kick drum, the snare drum, the bass. It's not a great system. And there are a ton of amazing specialized tools built to restore broken old audio. There's stuff to remove the clicks and pops from vinyl, the hiss from tapes. You can even remove reverb. It's crazy. But if you wanted to actually isolate an instrument or a voice, that's impossible. You can't unbake a cake. Yeah, so now we can just unbake cakes. Even free tools like Splitter.ai will let you drop in any MP3 and give you the vocals, guitars, bass, drums, piano, and everything else all as separate tracks. And it's pretty good. It's pretty good for free. I actually use this a lot when I'm making cover songs. It really helps me hear exactly what's going on in every instrument of a track, all those little details that you can't quite hear in the full mix. So if that's what a free site can do, what can someone with an actual budget do? Well, now we know, and it's thanks to Peter Jackson, the guy you call when you want to make old British things good again. In 2021, when Jackson was going through old documentary footage of the Beatles for his upcoming series Get Back, he needed a way to sort through the kind of absolute garbage audio he had to work with. See, the Beatles, the subjects of this documentary, really didn't want to be in a documentary. When the cameras were in the studio, they would just crank up a guitar amp to maximum volume and then strum random chords while they talked to each other so they could hear each other, but the cameras couldn't hear them. That's not helpful if you're trying to make a documentary about the Beatles. So Peter Jackson had his team literally write new software just to isolate specific sounds within a recording. With this new software called MAL for Machine Audio Learning, they were able to separate every single sound in the footage, individual tracks of each Beatle talking in perfect clarity. And even better, they could apply this to the music too. They could separate out individual instruments. This is what let them remaster Revolver last year, something that they thought was physically impossible because of how the tracks were recorded. See, when you're producing music, you usually want to have separate tracks for each instrument. One for the kick drum, one for the snare drum, the bass, the guitar. Each singer gets their own track. But in the old days, we only had so many tracks on a piece of tape to work with, usually only 24, sometimes even 16. And song productions, especially the kind the Beatles were doing, pushing the boundaries of what you could do in making a song, you'd often need way more than this. Hell, most songs I make now have at least 70 tracks, sometimes over 100. So to save on space, you'd bounce down a bunch of tracks, like all the backing vocals or all the drums, to just a single track each. And sometimes you'd get weird with it, like track 2 has the bass and piano on it, track 3 has John's vocal and an accordion for 2 measures for some reason, and it works fine at the time, it gets the record out the door. But then 30 years later, you want to spruce that record up a little bit. You want to change the EQ on the bass. How do you do that without affecting the piano as well? And this is where Peter Jackson comes in. So what exactly did he build and how does it work? There is no information about what MAL is. There is like 2 sentences he has mentioned in an interview somewhere, and he says, "It lets us separate out the sounds of the Beatles." And that's not helpful when you're writing a video about it. Yeah, Peter Jackson has not been super public about what MAL is or how it works. But I'm a giant fucking nerd who knows way too much about AI stuff, so I can give you a good idea of what's going on here. Machine learning is the process of showing a computer a bunch of things in the hopes that it will do something similar to those things. Show it a bunch of pieces of different text and it'll spit out similar text. Show it a bunch of playthroughs of Super Mario Bros. And it'll figure out how to get Mario to go right on the screen. Show it the entire body of work of every artist who's ever lived, and Twitter users will make anime catgirls with it. So, my best guess as to what Peter Jackson and his team came up with is this. They showed the computer 2 different pieces of audio, one that's a full mix, and one that's just the bass. The computer looks at one, looks at the other, and learns to find just that stuff in the original, and throw out everything else. And then they did that a million more times with every instrument. You need a lot of training data to make something like this work, especially as clear as they've got it. And I'm betting that since he had basically unrestricted access to everything the Beatles ever did, he probably built these models on the Beatles playing their instruments and their own voices. Like, yeah, there's a lot of instances of bouncing down tracks like that, but he's got to have a lot of examples of what John's voice sounds like completely solo from everything else. And if he can just compare the full mix to that soloed track enough times, you get an AI that's really good at finding John Lennon in a mix. So something interesting to note here is that the AI isn't actually removing the other sounds. It's not isolating what's actually there. It's recreating its best guess at what it thinks is there. It's just really, really good at doing that. Peter Jackson's work on Get Back was the missing piece of the puzzle for making Now and Then work. Now and Then was the last of those 3 songs on the demo tapes that Yoko sent the rest of the Beatles back in the 90s. But it was just too noisy to be able to make John's demo work in the actual recording, and they wanted to have John's voice on it. Once Paul saw what Peter Jackson could do with this new technology, he dusted off the old tapes and got back to work. He recorded new bass parts, called up Ringo for new drums, they both recorded vocals, they used MAL to recreate John's voice completely crystal clear from the original demo, and they even had guitar tracks that George Harrison recorded back in that 1995 session. But there's one other Beatle that was missing, another George. George Martin was the Beatles' producer and arranger. All those gorgeous string sections and so many amazing, groundbreaking production techniques were his doing, and he passed away in 2016. So they had his son, Giles Martin, do the string arrangements. That is so cool to me, and it sounds amazing. Watching the music video and the short film documentary they made about the making of the song, you can really just see how much fun Paul and Ringo had revisiting it. And George too in the footage from the 90s. This is almost definitely the last Beatles song we'll ever get, but I do wonder what else is out there waiting to be restored. Give me the fucking theatrical releases, Lucas, come on. Thanks for watching. I tried something different here. I don't usually do like long talky videos like this, so if you enjoyed this, let me know down in the comments, give me a like, and subscribe for more videos like this one. If you like hearing me talk about music and want to learn how to make it yourself, you can head over to quickstartmusic.com. It's my collection of online music production courses built to help you learn to make music the way you want to. And if you use the code LSE at checkout, you'll get 50% off your first month. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.